Hey everyone, in this video I'll be covering an update, sort of like a progress update to my stat stacking build. This is sort of like a part 2, and I'll be talking about how I got from 2 million DPS to currently 4 million DPS. That's right, in the hideout I have 4.1 million DPS on my Tempest Flurry, and it gets higher in battle, maybe 5.5 million or so, because you have buffs in battle. But really, I like to look at baseline DPS, and 4.1 million it is in Hideout. Now, I know many people also would like to actually have details on how you start and how you progress through the build. And because this is a part 2 video, I won't really be covering that in this video. But what I will do is to provide a link to my part 1 video where I did cover how to start off as a stat stacker, how to build a passive tree, and how to progress your gear over time to get to 2 million DPS. This video, like I said, is sort of like a continuation to that. So if you're currently maybe like 1-2 million DPS and you want to have ideas on how to take your stat stacker Invoker even further, then this is the video for you. Before going into the changes that I made, here is a couple of highlights on how this build at 4 million DPS performs in maps and in bosses. Welcome back. So now that you've seen the highlights, so to speak, I'll cover on the changes that I made since my last video and how impactful they were on DPS. So I ended my last video where I just recently purchased the Warrior Invictus that had 5% attributes as well as elemental resistances. This is, I think, the very first step. If you want to take your build further, you really need to have this, because the elemental resistance is pretty key, unless you don't care about resistances at all. But your shield resistances are really very important, and getting this Warrior Invictus helps a lot because it allowed me to move my Against the Darkness Time Loss Diamond away. So previously on this particular slot, I had an Against the Darkness Diamond that gave me 4% fire resistance and lightning resistance per small node, and there are 7 small nodes here, so this diamond in the past gave me 28% fire and lightning resistance. But because I had the Warrior, I no longer needed that, so I just put in a regular jewel here. But what it allowed me to do next is to go for a From Nothing Diamond that targets Resonance. From Nothing allows you to pick up passive nodes without pathing to them, as long as they're around the Keystone passive, in this example the Resonance passive. So if you look at resonance now, it now has a small circle around it, and I can pick up any passive notes without puffing to them, and the main one will of course be spaghettification. Now I used to have to put in a controlled metamorphosis diamond here to pick up spaghettification, so with the from nothing I can move away the controlled metamorphosis, and instead what I put in its place is against the darkness time loss diamond that gave me 4% increased strength and 4% increased intelligence per notable passive. So spaghettification now gives me 4% strength and intelligence, which is absolutely massive. And I could also then pick up these two crit notes. I already had them, but in the past I had to puff to them. Now I could pick them up without puffing to them, and in addition they also gave me 4% strength and intelligence each. This allowed me to refund the points here, the small crit notes, and I could then spend the points here, so I don't need actually extra points, but I could pick up Event Horizon as well as Seeing Stars using the points I refunded from the small notes here. And these also give me 4% strength and intelligence. Lastly, I then puffed further upwards and spent 5 points to go to Deep Trance, which is pretty nice because it gives me attack speed and cost of skill reduction, which is relevant to the build, but it still also gives me 4% increased strength and intelligence because of this diamond. In total, there are 6 notable passives picked up by this, so I actually get 24% increased strength and 24% increased intelligence, which is absolutely massive for this build. The next thing I did is to adjust my anoint on the amulet as well as getting a Megalomaniac Diamond. Now the first thing to note is that what do you actually look for in terms of Megalomaniac and what do you actually anoint? In my part 1 video, you could actually just do without a Megalomaniac Diamond and then just anoint Barbaric Strength. And I think that would be the play if you're just starting out. But as you are progressing in DPS and you want to squeeze out more DPS, what I would recommend is to find a Megalomaniac Diamond that has either Falcon Dive or Wildstorm. So Wildstorm is here. In my example, I took Falcon Dive because that's the one that I found. But either Falcon Dive or Wildstorm is okay. And then whichever one that you don't have on the Megalomaniac, you anoint it on your amulet. So in this case, because I have Falcon Dive here, what I did is anoint Wildstorm on my amulet. Now, very importantly, the second passive on Megalomaniac should be something relevant as well. And the ideal one will actually be both Wildstorm and Falcon Dive here. But you can hopefully also find either Vulgar Methods or Barbaric Strength. Vulgar Methods or Barbaric Strength is a huge DPS increase as well. And if you can get it as a secondary passive, it is good. It is not mandatory though, so the secondary passive, in my case, I have Vulgar Methods. It is mainly as a DPS boost, so you could also potentially have something such as Overwhelming Strikes or Storm Charge, or maybe even a simple notable like Beef. Beef adds plus 25 strength, which is pretty useful. So any passive that's relevant that increases damage, or maybe like a defensive passive such as Insightfulness should work as well. But the ideal situation really is just you have a secondary passive that is useful for the build. That's about it. So whatever one that you can find with either Falcon Dive or Wildstorm is enough. Though generally having 2 passives that are good is quite expensive for a Megalomaniac, which is why I do not recommend to get this until you are at 2-3 million DPS and you have Divine Orbs to spend. Personally, I got really lucky here because I picked this up for just 10 Divine Orbs, which is really a steal. This can really go for maybe 50 to 100 Divine Orbs. But it is quite useful, so Vulgar Methods is a good DPS boost for me, and having either Falcon Dive or Wildstorm means that you can then get Wildstorm here on my anoint and Falcon Dive on my Megalomaniac without puffing to them. And the point is that you then save on a lot of points which you can then use to puff elsewhere, mainly in my case to additional jewel sockets. If you don't have Megalomaniac, obviously you can still just simply anoint Wildstorm on your amulet and then just path to Falcon Dive instead. It's just additional 3 points, so you could like take points away from this jewel path, so just -1 jewel and then path to Falcon Dive instead, and that way you can do without the Megalomaniac Diamond. But if you can find a good Megalomaniac Diamond, I think it is worth it to get it. The third change that I did is fairly simple. I just went to get a Hand of Wisdom and Action, a HOWA, that has 1 to 12 lightning damage. So in my first video, I only had 1 to 10 lightning damage. It was a basic HOWA. In terms of stat stackers, the 1 to 12 lightning damage corruption is by far the biggest DPS contribution, much more than a 4% increased attack speed. A 1 to 12 lightning damage compared to a 1 to 10 lightning damage is roughly 15 to 20% DPS boost, so that's pretty massive when you have DPS in the millions. Obviously, this isn't even the BIS, the best in slot. You could have a corrupt that gives you 4% attack speed and a 1 to 12 lightning damage, and that will obviously be better, but that is also the more expensive option, and it goes for roughly 200 to 250 Divine Orbs currently, and I just don't have it in me to farm that many Divine Orbs until the league ends, so I compromised and went for this instead. Thirdly is the Ingenuity Belt and the Bridge Rings. So the Ingenuity Belt, I had a 74% one in my first video, so I upgraded to 80% with plus 15 strength. And of course, this also isn't the best in slot. Ideally, I would like to have a 95-96% Ingenuity, but that's extremely expensive. I might try to gamble and wheel ops a couple of belts before the league ends to see if I can hit, a God rolled one. But if I do get it, I'll see how much DPS I get. But as of now, this is the best I could get. I also changed my bridge rings, so these are much better bridge rings than the one I had. What I was going for is obviously high attribute totals across both rings, but I also wanted flat damage. Now these rings aren't that amazing, and if you can find bridge rings with high attributes as well as all 3 prefixes being high flat damage, that is the dream ring, and that is a significant damage boost by itself, maybe a couple 100,000 DPS. As it is, the rings that I have do have high attributes, but the flat damage are only 2 out of 3 affixes, and they aren't that high to begin with. So this ring costed me 25 Divine Orbs, and this ring costed me 60. So I think I kind of overpaid for them, but I really wanted to have a good ring, so I spent the currency for it. You don't want percent lightning damage on your ring. Percent damage is horrible. In fact, I have a video explaining why percent damage is horrible, and I will maybe also include that in the video description. But what you want is flat damage, which is adds X to X, either physical or fire or cold or lightning damage to attacks. This gives you more DPS, significantly more DPS than percent lightning damage. Now, what element should you go for your bridge ring? Unfortunately, it is very difficult, to target a specific element that also has all the stats on the bridge ring. So my answer is whatever elements that you can get is fine, as long as it has all the the attributes and the number on the flat damage is kind of decent, then that's the one that you should go for. If you have the Divine Orbs to spend, then the ideal situation is to actually get fire and cold, because you want to be able to have fire and cold element to your attacks, so that you can land Ignite, Chill, and Freeze on Tempest Bell. Tempest Bell gets a 30% damage boost per elemental element inflicted on it. So getting different elements to your attacks allows you to easily land Ignite. You don't need a lot, just one fire roll like that already allows me to ignite my Tempest Bell, and Tempest Bell gets 30% damage boost. If you're not worried about the elements, if you have say fire damage elsewhere already, I don't know where else you can get it, but say maybe from a volcanic skin passive or something like that. In terms of just raw damage, lightning damage, such as the one here, is the biggest damage contributor, obviously, because you have passives such as Wildstorm that contributes, that further enhances this damage. But like I said, you can't really be picky, because if you try to go for a very specific damage, you really restrict the ring that you can find on trade site, and it gets very expensive. So whatever whatever flat damage that you can is a good bonus to have. Finally is the Controlled Metamorphosis. Previously I had Controlled Metamorphosis here to pick up Spaghettification, but because I have the From Nothing Resonance and I could already pick up Spaghettification, the final step is moving the Controlled Metamorphosis here. Now I did this as the final step, and the only reason I did this is to pick up Drenched, actually. And the only reason I picked up Drenched is to get the cold damage. The increased chance to shock doesn't matter. When you're doing 4 million DPS, every hit that you do will instantly shock enemies anyway. Why is the cold damage useful here? Well, because I don't have cold damage on my rings, unfortunately. So I wanted cold damage firstly, so that I can then land Chill and Freeze on Temper Spell, which, like I said earlier, already adds 30% DPS or damage per elemental ailment. But having the cold damage has a second benefit, in that it now adds cold damage to Tempest Flurry, and this also means that Tempest Flurry can now freeze, and because Tempest Flurry can now freeze, I can now spend 1 point on Resonance and pick up charged stuff. Normally, if you just have Tempest Flurry and you don't have cold damage, you can't have Combat Frenzy and Resonance combo, because Shock doesn't produce charges on Combat Frenzy. So being able to freeze allows me to now get charges on Combat Frenzy, and allows me to now have charged stuff in the build, and this is the only reason why I put a Controlled Metamorphosis here. Now this also allows me to pick up Pure Power, but Pure Power is really since I'm here, might as well kind of thing. You might be thinking, what's so bad about Pure Power? It should be extremely good for the build, because I now have 850 intelligence, and this means that Pure Power, by the description, should be adding 170% increased lightning damage, which sounds like a lot for a skill like Tempest Flurry, which is predominantly lightning damage, and Hand of Wisdom and Action giving a lot of lightning damage. But it's actually not that much. It's not as amazing as it appears to be on the surface. So let me give you a showcase here. Yes. So if I just go and refund and I remove Pure Power, previously I had 4.1 million DPS, and without Pure Power my DPS drops to 3.83. So in other words, if I go to Pure Power, picking up Pure Power increases my DPS from 3.83 to 4.1 million, which isn't nothing. Obviously, it is something still, but the plus 170% lightning damage gives me roughly 280,000. No, more than that. 260,000 DPS. 260,000 DPS out of 3.8 million is not even 10%. That is maybe 6 or 7% DPS increase. In fact, if I compare that to Barbaric Strength, which is over here, Barbaric Strength gives me only 45% crit damage bonus and 10 strength, but it actually would give me more DPS, 100,000 more DPS than Pure Power. But how would you actually get Barbaric Strength anyway? It's on the other side of the tree. So alternatively, if you don't want to pick up Pure Power and don't want to get charged stuff, you can put Controlled Metamorphosis here and use Controlled Metamorphosis with a medium large ring to pick up Wildstorm, and this then allows you to anoint Barbaric Strength on your amulet, which is actually a bigger DPS increase. I tried that and I had 4.3 million DPS compared to the 4.1 million DPS that I have with this setup. So that will doing that will lead to a bigger DPS for Tempest Flurry, but I think losing the 200,000 DPS in order to pick up Drenched and Charge Staff is worth it. It's a nice quality of life to have Charge Staff, and not only does it increase my range, obviously, and allows me to shoot through enemies, through walls and obstacles. The other reason why Charge Staff is nice is because I then move my Innervate and Ice Bite into Charge Staff. Previously, Innervate and Ice Bite were on my Heralds, so instead now I have Ambush and Longshot on my Heralds instead, and I move them here. This is useful, I feel, especially for Ice Bite, because previously when Pinnacle bossing, you wouldn't really activate your Heralds because there's nothing to kill around the Pinnacle bosses, so you kind of lose out on the buffs. By moving Ice Bite and Innervate here, you should be able to proc them pretty reliably with Charge Staff shooting out shockwaves. So this means that I think it's a more consistent way, in other words, to get uptime on these buffs and therefore boost your damage that way. So that is at least the reasoning I had to pick up Charge Staff instead. Now I won't go through the other skills and support gems, but they are covered in my part 1 video. Like I said, this is just a progress update. I didn't make any changes to them, so you can look through the video for part 1, and there's also a build planner link in the part 1 video as well, so feel free to use that. Finally is my so-called wish list. Now the 4 million Hideout DPS isn't even a ceiling. Stat Stacker Invokers can go much higher than that, and I'll cover some of the stuff that you can do to take this even further. So first of all, obviously, is the ingenuity. Having like 95 to 97% ingenuity will be a huge boost, as well as changing the rings for best in stock rings, but those are hundreds of divine orbs. If you are rich in divine orbs, you could do that and you'll see a massive DPS boost. Next up is the HOWA. Getting a 4% and 1 to 12 is ideal, but the 4% isn't even a major DPS boost. That will add about 32% more attack speed, which I think is maybe a few 200,000 DPS maybe, so roughly around there. So it is still a DPS boost, but it costs a lot more. And then next, if you go to the passive tree, the ideal situation here is to get a Corrupted Against the Darkness that has 5% strength and or 5% intelligence, but that is extremely expensive. Just having 5% here will be maybe 200 plus divine orbs already, and having both will be like mirror tier pricing. So, but it is pretty sizable because of 6 notables. The 1% here is 6% more per attribute, and that is pretty sizable in my mind. Finally, in terms of upgrades, having the Adorned Diamond as well as Magic Corrupted Jewels. I have one Magic Corrupted Jewel here, so this is a good example. Won't make a big difference. So you want to have Energy Shield and crit damage bonus on the Magic Jewels, as well as a corruption that gives a stat such as this, and this will pair very well with the Adorned Diamond. I don't have the Adorned Diamond, and I'm mainly using now just rare jewels with stat corruption. And I usually the only two that matters is on my jewels is Energy Shield and crit damage bonus. The other ones doesn't matter at all. It's not relevant to the build. But if you have the Adorned and Magic Corrupted Jewels, it is a massive DPS boost. There are, I think, 6 or 7 non-unique jewel sockets in my build. So if you have 1 for the Adorned and 5 to 6 more for Magic Corrupted Jewels, it is a sizable DPS boost, but due to the price of the Adorn and Magic Corrupted Jewels such as these currently go for 30 to 50 Divine Orbs, I just don't have it in me to farm for them at the moment, but that will be the aspiration if you get this far. So that's it for this video. I hope it's been helpful, and if you have any questions, please feel free to leave it in the comments and I'll get back to you on your questions. Thanks for watching.